Grüß, willkommen hinein an einen Fragens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 51 of our Figure Gaming video series. This video is designed to assist players to construct a micro-armour force mix for 1939 using either squad, platoon or company scale rules. That is, one element is equal to a squad, platoon or company. I'll be covering the Polish forces in this particular video. This video is designed to offer a force mix for any rules. However, different rules will require some minor adjustment to any force mix. For example, Panzer Corps allows you to deploy platoon-sized supporting elements, even though it's a company scale set of rules. That is, one element equals a company. I'll attempt to cover the most common differences. It should be noted this guide is not suitable for Flames of War, and these rules have a reduced focus on historical accuracy and more on playability. Regardless, those rules have excellent guides which players can use rather than this video. At a squad scale, that is one element equals a squad, I mainly use Micro Squad the Game, World War II, as my guide in this video. However, rules such as Blitzkrieg Commander, 2nd edition, Main Panzer, and Battle Group by Ian S. Clarke should all easily be able to use the force mixes provided. At platoon scale, that is one element equals a platoon, my primary set of rules are Spearhead, but other rules such as Combat HQ, Kampfgruppen Commander and Combined Arms should all be able to use the force mix guides provided. Rules such as FFT3 use special combat team elements which will need to be accounted for, but as long as you understand that, those rules can be used as well. At company scale, that is one element equals a company, my main guide is LWRS, or the reformatted version, Bewegunskrieg, but Panzer Corps and Divisional Commander can easily use the suggested force mixes provided in this video. When creating force mixes, we need to start with the parent formation, which in the case of the Polish would be their mechanized brigade, supported by an independent tank battalion. When we move to company scale, we'll need to assume both historically available brigades are combined and are supported by independent tank battalions, otherwise we don't really get a large enough force mix. The defensive forces would come from the infantry divisions. This depends on what style of scenario you wish to play, but as meeting engagements between equal forces provide a less than satisfactory game, I'm assuming you need a defending force as well as an attacking force. While you could use your attacking force in defense, in practice this is probably not wise and may leave you at a severe disadvantage. Using a squad scale set of rules, that's one element equals a squad, a player will need to deploy a battalion, both a defensive infantry battalion and an offensive mechanized battalion. In most cases, a player will need a battalion headquarters and from 2 to 3 company headquarters. I like to make these elements interesting by including a staff car or horse on it, with 2 figures on the company headquarters and 3 on the battalion headquarters. I'm unaware of any specific Polish or French command packs, but if you use a British command pack, Heroic and Ross sells 6 command figures for 60p, with 2 packs meeting your requirements easily. Most squad scale rules do not cover any air-to-air combat, thus there may not be any need to purchase any fighters, but as they may be used in platoon and company scale rules, I'd consider it regardless. You can also consider an observation aircraft, as some rules do deal with observation. Heroic and Ross offers the PZL-23 light bomber for £1.25p, the PZL P-17C fighter for £1.50p, and the LWZ-3 Miła observation aircraft for £1.50p. The Polish army fielded 3 types of field artillery, the 155 and 105 howitzer, which would typically be off the playing area, and the 75mm gun, which could be either off or on the playing area. The mechanised brigades used a 100mm howitzer, but I'm unable to find a suitable figure to use, so the 105mm can be used instead. GHQ offers the 75 and 105 for $11.95 US for a pack of 2 with mounts, which may be all you require at this scale. Heroic and Ross offers the 75mm gun for 65p and the 155mm howitzer for 65p as well. They also offer the C2P, the C4P and C7P tractors for 65p each. The primary anti-tank gun was the 37mm Bofors, which would have been towed by a light tractor. You would probably aim for 3 of these weapons. The main anti-aircraft gun was the 40mm towed by the Fiat 621. The Polish also used an older 75mm anti-aircraft gun. Both weapons were held at corps or army level, so would not be common. The most common anti-aircraft weapon at this scale would be the AAMG. Heroic and Ross offers a 75mm anti-aircraft gun towed by a Fiat 621 for 65p, which does seem rather cheap. The 40mm is also available for 65p, that's the 40mm anti-aircraft gun. The AA machine gun is a bit more difficult to find. Heroic and Ross does offer a AA machine gun in one of its Russian heavy weapon packs, but I cannot recall which one exactly. It was probably the Russian heavy weapon pack with 50 figures in total, and I would probably suggest getting that if you wish to use these figures in a game at this scale. Engineers would be optional, and I've had no reason to field them at this scale. They would be infantry elements with figures doing engineering activity on them. There are no French or Polish engineer figures that I could find, so I'd probably look at British or Russian figures. My advice is to give these a miss, as they're not really required at a squad scale game or in a squad scale game. You have on offer up to 2 tankette companies, and a player may choose these vehicles instead of the 7TP light tank. Even if you use the 7TP light tank, you'll find you may be able to use some of these tankettes regardless. GHQ offers the TKS with 5 for $11.95 US. Heroic and Ross offers the TKS with 20mm gun, and TK3 for 50p each. The TKF could be represented by a TKS tankette. The main organic armour of the mechanised brigades was a company of Vickers 6-ton tanks. The Vickers came with twin turrets and a machine gun, as well as a 47mm gun. So that is yet another choice a player may take. Personally, I would give the Vickers a miss, but if you want to use them instead of the 7TP light tank, then this is an option that you may select. Heroic and Ross offers both versions of the Vickers light tank for 65p each. At a squad scale, that is, one element is a squad, you need to field probably a tank company, motorised infantry company, and of course including battalion support troops. Apart from the Vickers, the Polish mechanised brigades lack tanks, so you would be using a tank company from an independent tank battalion, which gives you the option of using 7TP tanks or the R35 tanks. Another option is the Warsaw Mechanised Brigade, which did contain a single tank company of 7TPs organically. In summary, if you are fielding a Polish force, you would want to use a Polish equipment if possible, so we end up with a company of Polish 7TP light tanks. The Polish army used a company strength of 13 to 15 tanks, so if you were using GHQ, you would purchase 3 packets. GHQ offers packets of 5 for $11.95 US, while Heroic and Ross offers them at a price of 65p per vehicle. The infantry company consists of 3 light mortars, headquarters, support, and 140 men mounted in trucks. Each infantry element should consist of 4 figures, so this represents 42 infantry figures, and the headquarters support element may consist of 3 figures. Players need to determine how they wish to mount their own infantry, but this is possibly a good guide. The light mortars could represent 2 or 3 figures and a mortar. The big question is the trucks. Many players do not bother to purchase any trucks at this scale, as the troops are commonly dismounted when they enter the playing area. Heroic and Ross sells 50 infantry figures for £4 and 50 heavy weapon figures for £4. There are no specific Polish infantry figures, so you'd use French. GHQ sell French infantry and heavy weapons for $11.95 US per packet, each of which contains 50 figures. Heroic and Ross sells Ursus A trucks or Fiat 621 trucks for 65p per vehicle. The infantry company is identical to the motorised infantry company, except they have no motor transport. You will need 2 of these formations, requiring 2 50-figure packs from Heroic and Ross or GHQ. Unlike the mechanised brigade, you can select regimental level supporting equipment. For each company, you could expect to have 1 75mm gun, 1 81mm mortar, and 3 37mm anti-tank guns. The mortar and machine guns would come in the heavy weapons packs from Heroic and Ross. At this point, you should have a force mix to allow to play as an attacker or defender in a game which you would expect to complete within a day. If you select all the tank options and transports, you'll end up with a force mix consisting of about 160 elements. If you only select one tank option and purchase almost none of the transport, this will drop to about 80 elements and is significantly more affordable. Using a platoon scale set of rules, that is, 1 element equals a platoon, a player will need to deploy a brigade or regiment. although rarely a full-strength brigade or regiment. A player will need a defensive infantry regiment and an offensive tank or mechanised regiment or brigade. In most cases, a player will need a brigade or regimental headquarters and from 2 to 3 battalion headquarters. You can use the same headquarter elements you had selected for a squad scale set game or squad scale game, except it's very rare to have a 3rd battalion at this scale. At platoon scale, it's possible rules will cover air-to-air combat, which would require you to purchase fighters. If you are playing an attack and counterattack scenario, you may require even more fighters. This is because the defender will normally field, let's say, 3 fighters, and the counterattack force will probably add another 3 fighters and 3 light bombers. I would select a range of different fighter types, just for a bit of variety. Observation aircraft are more common at this scale. Your aircraft range could include some 2-engine bombers as well, but I would suggest that would be a fairly rare occurrence if they're used at this particular scale. The field artillery available would be the same as the squad scale force mix. However, at this scale, these elements would be more commonly used, although it would be very unusual to field any 155mm howitzers. As with the field artillery, the anti-aircraft figures would be more common at this scale, although less 37mm anti-tank guns would typically be used. Once again, the force mix you have selected for the squad scale is more than adequate for this scale. Engineers at this scale are more common, and a player should consider purchasing some engineering figures. Soviet engineer figures from Heroic and Ross may be the best option. It's also more common to use transporting trucks at this scale, especially if you intend to have a game with a lot of movement. One good thing about this scale is you have a chance to field lots of different tank vehicles at low quantities per tank. If you go down this path, you may end up using Heroic and Ross figures, as you can purchase them individually. You don't really need packs of 5 at this scale, per tank anyway. At this scale, we have to depend on the attached battalion of 7 TP light tanks, as a typical attacking force mix should consist of a tank battalion and an infantry battalion, or motorised infantry battalion. The tank battalion can only be obtained from the attached 7 TP light tank battalion. Strangely enough, the total number of tanks is similar to our squad scale force mix. While less than satisfactory, the mechanised brigades do consist of 3 tank companies, so you could use all the original tanks in this formation, but apart from the Vickers light tanks, it would be difficult to attack with tankettes. You also have an issue with headquarters, as these tanks report directly to the brigade headquarters, or must be attached to the motorised infantry battalion headquarters. This lack of headquarters could have a major negative effect, depending on the rules used. However, all these objections are purely, actual tactical issues that you may experience when you're actually having a game, and maybe you can't avoid it. We can field the entire motorised infantry battalion, which at this scale represents 9 infantry elements. You actually end up with less infantry at using platoon scale sets of rules than squad scale sets of rules. While the infantry battalion is straightforward enough, the regimental level support elements pose an issue. In theory, we should not deploy any 75mm guns or 81mm mortars. However, it's reasonable to assume you will be allowed to deploy one of these 2 weapon types at least. If we select all the options and transports, we have a force mix of about 130 elements, which, apart from the aircraft, can be taken almost exclusively from the squad scale force mix. Using a company scale set of rules, that is, 1 element equals 1 company, a player will need to deploy a division or equivalent, although rarely a full-strength division. A player will need a defensive infantry division, but there is an issue with the offensive forces that the Polish did not possess a divisional-size mechanised formation. While not historical, I've bundled the 2 mechanised brigades and 2 tank battalions together under a corps headquarters to represent a divisional-size mechanised formation. While each brigade and battalion were at opposite ends of Poland in September 1939, if they were together, the Polish could have created a divisional-sized mechanised formation. The Japanese created an ad hoc mechanised formation in Manchuria before they created an official division, and it was roughly a divisional size. The Polish could have done the same if given enough time and if they had sufficient vision. At company scale, in most cases the player will need a corps or divisional headquarters and from 2 to 3 brigade or regimental headquarters. You can use the same headquarters elements you had selected for the squad scale set game, except it's very rare to have a 3rd regiment. We can use the same aircraft force mix as the platoon scale rules, except I would certainly consider some two-engine bombers at this scale. We can continue to use the field artillery from our other force mixes, squad and platoon, although it's still rare to field the 155mm howitzers. Players may need horses to tow some artillery, as the infantry division would require this. We can continue to use the same anti-tank and anti-aircraft gun force mix from the squad scale force mix. However, it would be rare to use all of them in a typical game. Engineers are almost always used at this scale, but it would be rare to have more than 3 elements of engineers. We can field all our tank figures, but only 1 per brigade of each in most cases, and not all of these vehicles that are shown would be deployed. At this scale, we need to use all the available attached tank battalions, including the R35 light tank battalions, so you may need to consider purchasing some of these vehicles. We need to field 2 motorised infantry battalions, 1 in each brigade. This shows one of the battalions. This assumes a lot of rounding, and players may look at the TO&E and conduct their own rounding based on their own preferences, but this is the most logical structure. As I've indicated previously, at this scale a lot of rounding occurs, which gives each player a reasonable amount of flexibility. If using a set of rules with strength points, you will need more elements than shown, but using LWRS we end up with 2 regiments of 2 battalions, as shown here. To be safe, you could expand this to 3 regiments of 2 battalions or 2 regiments of 3 battalions. The anti-tank guns are included here to show where they would be deployed, but are also counted in the anti-tank section of this video. The elements required may vary a great deal depending on the rules selected, but in this example we can build up our force mix easily using the elements from our platoon scale force mix. We only need some R35 light tanks and more infantry. Just a quick note, at this scale often you never need to actually deploy the infantry if they're motorised infantry. You use the trucks. It's basically dependent on the rules and also player preferences, but you may be able to avoid deploying so many actual infantry and use trucks instead. If you are uncertain which scale you will end up playing, then this chart can allow you to determine what to purchase, which will cover all scales of rules from squad to company scale, that is, squad per element, platoon per element, or company per element. If players are aware of the rules they wish to use, then they can look at the army lists within those rules to get a more accurate force mix. But this gives you enough flexibility to try a wide range of different rules. This is not covered in the original video, as I didn't consider battalion scale, that is 1 element equals a battalion, as viable. However, since creating the original video, I have discovered that this is a viable scale and gives me some good games. So if you wanted to try battalion scale, one possible method you can use is to create a force mix using cards, as you can see here. In this case, there is 9 cards which provide a division per card, of which a player would typically field 4 to 6. This totals about 48 to 72 elements. However, I'm not going to go into much detail concerning battalion scale. So, as a result, this concludes episode 51 of my figure gaming hobby series of videos, in this case covering building up a Polish 1939 force mix. Alle guten Dinge, kommen zu einem Ende.